At first light, the horizon bled with gold as 50 Comanche warriors encircled Caleb Thornfield homestead, their war paint fierce under the rising sun. Every one of them was there for the girl Caleb had hidden just hours before. It was still dark when Caleb, out tending his cattle near Willow Creek, caught the crack of gunfire rolling across the plains. Gunshots were nothing new in those parts. Texas was no stranger to skirmishes, outlaws, or tribal clashes, but something about these shots felt different. Desperate, final. Most men with sense would have turned their horse away. Caleb Thornfield wasn't most men, nor had he ever been accused of being wise. Against his better judgment, he urged his horse toward the echoes of violence. What he found changed everything. Behind a fallen cottonwood lay a Comanche girl, no more than 16, blood soaking the fringes of her buckskin dress. An army bullet was lodged deep in her shoulder, and every breath she took was shallow and strained. Her dark eyes glared up at him, not with fear but with defiance. Caleb's hand drifted toward his rifle. He hadn't forgotten the night 3 years earlier when Comanche raiders torched his neighbor's farm and took Sarah, his wife of 12 years, from him forever. The easy thing would have been to leave her there, let the prairie claim her. Safer that way, for everyone. But those eyes, those burning, stubborn eyes, brought back a promise whispered at Sarah's grave. Never let hatred consume the last of his soul. As he approached, she tried to crawl away, leaving streaks of blood in the dust. Her words came fast in her native tongue, warning him to keep his distance. Caleb dismounted, keeping his hands where she could see them. He could tell she was slipping. She wouldn't make it another hour without help. Cursing his own foolish heart, Caleb lifted her into his arms. She resisted weakly, then sagged against him, her strength gone. The ride back to his ranch stretched endlessly. Every rock, every bush seemed like it might conceal an ambush. The only sound was her labored breathing. At the barn, Caleb laid her gently in the hay and set about saving her life. He built a fire and heated his knife, knowing crude surgery he was about to attempt might kill her as easily as save her. When she came to, her eyes filled with terror and confusion. Why would a white man help her? What price would he demand? She bit down on a strap of leather, while he dug out the fragments of lead and stitched her up as best he could. The dawn brought no peace. Instead, it brought the thrum of war drums on the wind, closer with each heartbeat. Caleb's stomach knotted as he looked out through the barn's cracks. 50 mounted warriors surrounded his land, their leader astride a painted horse, battle scars crossing his chest, silver streaking his braids. The girl stirred behind him, fevered and weak. She whispered a name, and Caleb didn't need to understand Comanche to know she was calling for her father. The circle of warriors tightened. The war chief raised his hand, signaling the start of what might become slaughter. Caleb checked his weapons. 1 rifle, 2 pistols, a handful of rounds. Against 50 seasoned fighters, it wouldn't be a fight. It would be a slaughter. But running wasn't an option. The girl couldn't be moved, and they wouldn't outrun warriors on fresh horses. A voice rang out across the clearing, deep, full of rage. "White man, you have what is ours." Caleb felt his throat go dry. How could he explain? That he'd risked his life to help their daughter? To them, he was no hero, just another settler who'd taken what wasn't his. If he brought her out, they'd see the bloody bandages, the stitch wound, and call it torture. But if he refused, they'd storm the barn, and neither he nor the girl would see another sunrise. Before he could decide, the girl staggered to her feet, driven by will alone. She stepped out of the barn. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. In her native tongue, she told her father, "He saved me." For a breathless moment, the prairie fell silent. Even the horses seemed to wait. The chief stallion pawed the dirt as the weight of her words sank in. Warriors shifted uneasily, no longer certain of their cause. But one man was not swayed, the chief's young lieutenant, his face scarred and full of hate. He rode forward, close enough that Caleb could see the fire burning in his eyes. "She is the chief's blood." The young warrior growled in broken English. "You took her. You die. All white men die." 2 women from the group dismounted and hurried to the girl's side. They examined her, felt her fevered skin, saw the careful stitching, the clean dressing. They spoke quickly, urgently. One looked at the chief and gave a small nod. The girl had been treated well, but the lieutenant's hatred would not be so easily quieted. Caleb stood motionless, knowing that mercy and death both waited in the hands of men whose hearts he could not read. And the wind carried the silence of a prairie that had seen too much blood already. Dawn broke over the endless prairie, casting pale light across Caleb Thornfield's land just as 50 Comanche warriors took their places in a circle around his ranch. Their painted faces glowed with the fire of vengeance, and every eye burned with the same purpose: to reclaim the girl Caleb had brought into his barn in the dark hours before sunrise. It had started the day before, when Caleb rode out to check his cattle near the bend in Willow Creek. He heard the sharp crack of gunfire cutting through the stillness, the sound strange in its rhythm, final in its tone. Gunshots were nothing new in these wild lands. Texas knew too well the violence of soldiers, raiders, and outlaws, but these felt different, desperate somehow. A wiser man would have turned back toward the safety of his ranch. But Caleb Thornfield had never been known for caution. He pressed on, his gut tight with unease. What he found changed everything. Beneath the twisted branches of a fallen tree lay a Comanche girl, blood spreading from a wound in her shoulder where a bullet had torn through her flesh. Her dress of buckskin clung to her, heavy with blood, and her chest rose and fell in short, labored breaths. Her dark eyes fixed on Caleb, eyes filled not with terror, but with fierce defiance. Caleb's fingers twitched toward his rifle. He hadn't forgotten that night 3 years ago, when raiders set his neighbor's farm ablaze and took Sarah, his wife, from him forever. Leaving the girl to die would have been easy, maybe even just. But those eyes, those stubborn, unyielding eyes, made him pause. He thought of the promise he'd made by Sarah's grave, not to let hatred eat away at what was left of him. The girl tried to drag herself away, leaving a dark trail in the dust, muttering in her language for him to stay back. Caleb dismounted, keeping his hands open and empty. She was fading fast, and without help, she wouldn't last the hour. Against every instinct, Caleb lifted her into his arms. She fought him weakly at first, then went limp, her strength gone. The ride back to his ranch was slow and heavy. Each shadow on the horizon seemed like it might hide pursuers. The only sound was the girl's ragged breathing. At the barn, he laid her on fresh hay, built a fire, and heated his knife, knowing the crude work ahead might kill her, but doing nothing surely would. When her eyes fluttered open, they held both confusion and dread. She bit down on a strip of leather as Caleb worked, digging out the bullet and stitching the wound as best he could. As the first light of day stretched across the prairie, the deep beat of drums reached his ears, slow at first, then faster. Through the slats of the barn, Caleb counted them, 50 warriors in full war paint, surrounding his land. Their leader, scarred by years of battle, sat atop a painted horse. Behind Caleb, the girl stirred, whispering a name, her father's. The war chief raised his hand, and the circle closed tighter. Caleb checked his weapons, a rifle, 2 pistols, a handful of rounds. It wouldn't be enough. The chief called out in English, his voice like rolling thunder. "White man, you have what belongs to us." Caleb's throat was dry. How could he make them understand? That he'd risked his life to save their daughter? They would see only that she was taken. He stepped from the barn, empty-handed. Arrows tracked his every move. "She's alive," he called. "Your daughter is alive, but badly hurt." The chief's eyes stayed hard. "You lie. Bring her." Before Caleb could decide what to do, the girl stepped into the morning light, trembling but determined. In her tongue, she spoke to her father, her words clear. "He saved me." A hush fell over prairie. The chief's face shifted, but the young warrior at his side, the lieutenant, was not moved. He urged his horse closer, hatred carved deep into his face. "Lies," he spat. "He keeps her for a slave." Caleb saw doubt return to the warrior's eyes, saw their hands tighten on their weapons. But the girl spoke again, her voice stronger this time. Whatever she said made the lieutenant's face pale. Then she said more, and the chief's hand went to his tomahawk. The truth was out. The girl had told her father how the lieutenant had led her into an ambush, trading Comanche lives for army gold. The young man's hand went to his knife, but others were already moving to block him. The traitor panicked. His gun rose toward the girl. Desperate to silence her, Caleb moved without thinking, tackling him from his horse. They hit the ground, dust choking the air as they fought. A knife sliced across Caleb's ribs, but he barely felt it. Rage and purpose fueled him. This was the enemy he'd been waiting for, the kind that destroyed families. They rolled. The lieutenant on top, blade at Caleb's throat. "You should have stayed out of this," the man hissed. Caleb bucked, grabbed a stone, and struck him hard. The traitor slumped, blood running from a gash at his temple. Silence returned. The chief dismounted, came to Caleb's side, and looked down at him. "You protected my daughter," he said. "I'd do it again," Caleb answered, breathless but sure. The chief nodded, then turned to his people. They moved swiftly, half preparing to leave, half tending to the girl. Before they departed, the chief offered Caleb a small medicine bag. "Beat it with care. My daughter says you have lost a wife to our people. This will not bring her back, but may it guard your life until its time is done." But as Caleb reached for it, the crack of gunfire shattered the fragile peace. Soldiers appeared on the ridge, rifles ready. A trap. The lieutenant's treachery ran deeper than they knew. The chief dragged his daughter to cover as bullets tore through the air. Caleb raced to his cabin for his rifle. The army thought they'd come to save him, but he knew better. He loaded his Winchester, stepped outside, and found the chief's eyes on him. "You choose to fight with us?" the chief asked, stunned. "I choose to fight for what's right," Caleb said, leveling his gun at the ridge. The battle that followed was fierce. The Comanche fought with skill and fury, turning Caleb's ranch into a fortress. The cavalry charged again and again, losing men each time, their commander blind to his mistakes. Meanwhile, the traitor stirred, crawling toward a fallen weapon, ready to finish what he'd started. But one of his own people ended it, a single arrow through the heart. Justice, swift and final. And as the smoke rose over Caleb's land, it was clear. No matter who claimed victory, the prairie would remember the day when enemies became allies, and honor was the only thing that mattered. The sun was sinking low, casting long shadows over the battered land as the last of Caleb's cartridges rattled in his hands. Around him, the Comanche warriors crouched behind what little cover remained, hay bales, broken fence posts, the battered barn walls. Their arrows were nearly gone, many of them snapped or spent, and too many of their fighters bore wounds that made their grip on a bow or spear weak. Caleb's own ribs burned where the lieutenant's blade had found him, but he ignored the pain. He was down to his final box of bullets when a new sound reached his ears, the pounding of hooves from the east. For a heart-stopping moment, Caleb feared it meant more cavalry, come to finish what the others had started. But as the riders crested the rise, he saw no uniforms. These weren't soldiers. They were ranchers, neighbors from miles around, drawn by the thunder of gunfire. Men who knew Caleb Thornfield not as a soldier or fighter, but as a man who lent tools when theirs broke, who shared his well water when their pumps ran dry. The cavalry officer tried to wave them off, shouting that this was an official army action against hostile forces. But the ranchers saw what was really happening. Caleb standing side by side with Comanche warriors, defending his land. A girl, clearly wounded, being shielded, not held prisoner. Pete Murdoch, a grizzled rancher from 5 miles south, rode up to the officer, rifle ready. "What the hell's going on here? Soldier? That's Caleb Thornfield down there, and he's no Indian hunter unless he's got a reason." The commander's control was crumbling fast. His soldiers, already shaken by heavy losses, were glancing nervously between their leader and the armed ranchers. The officer's hand moved toward his revolver, desperation flickering in his eyes. Caleb saw it, and so did the chief. The man would rather shoot his way out than face disgrace. The officer drew his weapon, aiming at Pete, but before his finger could tighten on the trigger, a tomahawk split the air and struck him down. The chief's throw was deadly and true. Just like that, the fight was over. Without their leader, the soldiers dropped their guns, unwilling to die for a cause they no longer believed in. The ranchers advanced cautiously, helping disarm the remaining cavalry, while keeping a wary eye on the Comanche. Pete dismounted and walked to where Caleb knelt beside the wounded girl. Her fever had broken during the battle, and though she was pale and weak, her gaze was steady. "Caleb," Pete said quietly, "what in God's name happened here?" So Caleb told them of finding Ayanna, of trying to save her, of the betrayal that had led to this bloodshed. The ranchers listened, their anger shifting from confusion to understanding. The chief came forward, his war paint streaked with sweat and smoke. He looked at Caleb, then at the fallen officer, then at the men who had stopped a massacre. "This man," he said, gesturing to Caleb, "has more honor than those who wear your army's colors." Pete nodded. "That's the Caleb I know." But the danger wasn't over. The field was littered with the dead and wounded, soldiers and warriors alike. A Comanche war party stood in the heart of settler country. It was the kind of spark that could set a whole region ablaze. The chief saw it, too. He spoke quickly to his people, ordering them to prepare to leave before more troops arrived seeking revenge. Caleb shook his head. "Wait. She's not strong enough to travel. The wound might tear open again." The chief hesitated, tore between his daughter's safety and the risk of staying. Finally, he nodded. "We stay. For her." But Ayanna had her own will. With great effort, she rose, her voice clear and certain. She spoke in her language, her words steady despite her weakness. The chief blinked in surprise. She was claiming sanctuary on Caleb's land, invoking an ancient law that bound and protected her until she healed. The chief gave Caleb a long look, part respect, part warning, and placed a medicine bag in his hand. Their bond was sealed. Before they could breathe easier, more riders appeared on the horizon, this time from 3 directions. But these were no vengeful reinforcements. At their head rode Colonel Hayes from Fort Griffin, a veteran whose gray beard and weathered face spoke of years of hard choices. A white flag flew at his side. Hayes took in the scene in a glance. The dead, the wounded, the strange alliance of Comanche, settlers, and ranchers. He dismounted slowly, knowing a wrong word could still ignite disaster. "I was told a settler had kidnapped a Comanche girl," Hayes said, his voice steady. "Not that my men were slaughtering civilians." Pete spat in the dirt. "Your man was about to shoot me for asking questions. If that chief hadn't acted, you'd be burying more than soldiers." Hayes studied the faces around him, the chief's, Caleb's, Ayanna's. He saw truth in their eyes, saw the lies that had led to this. "It appears," he said at last, "there was a grave misunderstanding. We'll report that your commander acted beyond his orders, that peace was our aim from the start." The chief nodded, the weight of exhaustion in his eyes. "We will go with no further blood. This man," he pointed to Caleb, "saved my child." Ayanna remained at the ranch, as promised, until her strength returned. In those quiet days, she and Caleb shared words, taught each other, bridged the gap between 2 worlds with stories and language. When she left, strong and whole, she carried with her new knowledge, and left behind a bond that neither time nor distance could break. The Comanche never again raided Caleb's land, and as the years passed, his ranch became known as a place where peace could be brokered. Ayanna grew to be a voice for understanding, reading the treaties that once had deceived her people. And when Caleb's time came, decades later, that medicine bag still hung his side, a symbol of a choice that had changed everything.